When we started researching to come to Costa Rica, I suspect somewhat like you did, you know, we read what we could, we called movers, we called ads. We went through the same debate that probably, again, you might be yourself. Do we bring things? Do we leave it behind? I had a little bit of an attraction myself to this whole sort of Zen, fresh start thing, you know, leave all that crap behind, come down, start off nice, and you know, we accumulate so much stuff. So we started getting quotes, and people would come out to the house and they would walk around and we would go, yeah, we're going to take that, and no, we're not going to take that. And part of this process was because we had the mistaken impression that weight mattered. We knew we were trying to minimize stuff just in terms of price. We had the mistaken impression that every little item duty would, you know, you go, how much is the duty on this going to be? Ooh, maybe I should leave it. You know, and you start doing that for everything you own, and it makes you insane for one thing, and it's completely pointless for another thing, because really, that's not how it works. But we didn't know that at the time. So we get two different big companies, they come in, they walk around, they do their little list, and they came back with quotes that were remarkably similar, both of which were about $26,000 for two 40-foot containers, and that was not counting the duty. You read about all these percentages, and in fact, even when we did take the tour, Barry would say, people would ask questions, and Barry would say, well, you know, it's X percentage on certain types of things, and it's Y percentage on something else. I'm frantically scribbling, you know. It's sort of just like, it doesn't matter if you go with someone like us who actually wraps it in. It matters a whole lot if you go with one of these companies that doesn't. You actually pay duty on your shipping, because that's considered to be part of the value of getting the stuff here, right? So that becomes part of the value of the item. So now all of a sudden you got $26,000 in shipping. That's something you're actually going to be paying duty on. So here we have these $26,000 plus duty, which probably now what I know would have been $4,000 or $5,000, $6,000. So call it some $30,000+ to get our crap here, you know. And while the stuff in pure dollars doesn't begin to be worth $30,000, again, in the sense of just feeling like we needed it for life. We knew we needed to bring it. So then life goes on, we come and take the tour, we meet Barry, we ask him the question we always hate to be asked, which is, well, how much does it cost? And because every quote is personalized, there isn't a way to tell you how much it costs until you actually tell me where you're coming from, where you're moving to, and roughly what are you shipping. And I don't mean an itemized inventory list, I mean just tell me, you know, do you have a Viking range and a Sub-Zero fridge, or do you have kind of normal household goods? With that information, I can give you an exact quote, but it is possible, back then, this was 3+ years ago, Barry was able to say, oh, you know, a typical container is $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. Now I'd probably have to say a typical container is $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. But that was all inclusive. One of the first questions you actually face after you've decided to move here is, do you bring things at all? I tend to believe that for most people, I'm even going to go out on a limb and say the overwhelming majority of people, bringing your own stuff is actually going to be part of a successful move here, because there's a transition you make from visiting to living. And for most of us, you know, you can go, you've been to the furniture stores, you can go and buy a lovely dining room table, you can even these days buy a decent mattress if you're willing to pay a lot of money, you can buy a perfectly attractive sofa, you can buy dishes, you can buy pots, you can buy it all here. First of all, when you buy everything, not just the sofa and the dining room table and the dishes, but you buy, you know, the tea strainer and the coffee pot and the bathroom scales and every single thing you need to fully outfit a house, and you will spend way more than that $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 that a container is going to cost you. Mm-hmm. Maybe I come from this as a woman, maybe I come from it just as someone who really does like my things, despite the fleeting fantasy of leaving it all behind. But I think for most people, coming to a foreign country, no matter how much you want to be here, is disorienting. And having your space is actually pretty important. So I'm going to say that I actually tend to fall fairly strongly on the side that when you're really going to move here for real, shipping your stuff is probably the best option. I think there are a couple of notable exceptions to that. One is if you're not completely sure, or if maybe you're a couple and one of you is really into it and the other not so much. If you've got serious reservations, or there's some particular situation where you think it might not work out, then by God, put your stuff in storage. You know, pay $1,000 to store it for a few months in the States and come down and rent a furnished place. You'll pay a little bit more for the place. You'll pay a lot less than spending $10,000 to ship it back and $10,000 to ship it home again. That's, you know, when you're not sure, that's a really good time not to ship. Well, I mentioned earlier the duty, you know, how much is the duty on this? Well, we can help properly manage your inventory list to get the right values, appropriate values, the kinds of values that Customs is going to take as being plausible. They're reasonable, which they are. They have an appropriate mix between things that are higher value and things that are lower value. I mean, not everybody, you know, it's unreasonable if Customs looks and absolutely every single thing you own is worth $2, you know, they're going to go, I don't know about that. But that's part of the experience we bring, right, is helping to value that list so that you're going to come through with less duty. The duty on individual items is not something you need to labor over. The weight is something you can completely ignore. It is not possible to exceed the weight limit on a container with household goods. It is possible that there is a weight limit, and it's actually about 64,000 pounds. It comes out in practicality to be about 50,000 pounds. You cannot do it. So don't worry about weight. We would go around our house and go, oh, I love this, but it's so heavy. You know, don't go there. Bring it. The way we work is we bring the container on the chassis. It's up on a truck. It's, you know, yay high off the ground to your door. You are responsible for having packed everything up, and I will have given you such wonderful extensive instructions. That's not as, you know, it's not too big a deal. You are responsible for getting the container loaded. There is an enormous range of possibilities for that. It's also, for most of us, we're at a point where we're not necessarily wanting to do the heavy lifting anymore. I mean, I know we certainly didn't. So having some kind of help is smart. But again, it's not rocket science. Put heavy things on the bottom, put light things on the top, pack it in tightly, and again, I will have given you good advice on that. So we bring it to you. You load it up, a custom seal goes on it, the truck driver arrives with a custom seal, you write the seal number down, and that's basically the end of your work. So at that point, you're done. That container has been offloaded into a bonded warehouse, so a government contracted warehouse to handle the customs process. They offload it, they palletize it, they count it. You've given us an inventory that said you had 312 items. And when it gets to the bonded warehouse, they offload it. And they're not going to check it off against your inventory that this is box 1, this is box 2, and so on, but they're going to go 1, 2, 3, and 312 items come off the container. We're well on our way to a smooth processing at that point. 311, 313 items, not a big deal. 273 items come off, or worse, you know, 400 items come off and your list said 312? Okay, now we've got Customs kind of going, what's up with that, you know? So maybe it was an honest mistake, right? But they don't know that. They're now looking, and in a sense, part of our goal is to make the not so interested look a lot. We will have given them your inventory list, which we've translated. We've helped tweak the values if necessary to sort of smooth the process. At least in our experience, that almost never happens, because part of our expertise is to make sure that the values are not something that they're going to look at and say, we disagree with that value. In theory, they could open every single box. We never have that happen. We have them open a few boxes to kind of ascertain that, you know, you didn't say pots and pans and it's really machine guns. You know, they're trying to do a good job. They're not trying to give you a hard time. Maybe simply not taking the advice that we provide in terms of packing well. We did have someone recently, a client, who simply didn't wrap their furniture. And you know, I'm going to take like this tiny little thimbleful of blame and say, gee, maybe I didn't emphasize that enough. I'm going to take a big spoonful beyond that and say, gee, it seems sort of like common sense. But at the same time, they didn't wrap up furniture and things that were delicate. So after it, you know, bear in mind, this container is in your drive. It's now going to go trucking, sometimes across country to a port. Maybe it's going to be put on a rail car, maybe. It's then going to be lifted onto a ship. It's going to sail a couple thousand miles. It's going to come off. It's going to go on a truck through the mountains. It's going to be, you know, it's got a lot of processing going on. So they ended up with some stuff that was scratched. And while everything is insured against loss, I mean, if the ship sinks or something, which, luckily, is not a big problem, you're not going to be able to get what's called scratch and dent insurance because you packed it yourself. Occasional delays, you need to understand that the process is not 100% our control. Occasionally ships, the container is going to be put on a ship and then the schedule, actually the phrase is it got rolled, so it gets rolled back to the next sailing, which is maybe a week away. So it is a process that has a little bit of variability. We've had containers get here, get processed, and be in your house in as little as 3 weeks. As I say, it rarely goes more than 5. 4 is a good average. Few people send 20-foot containers, and that really is plenty. You know, you're coming from a smallish apartment, or you've already downsized. You don't have, now we're really down to your most favorite things and some smallish stuff. A 20-foot container is actually probably, if you're not putting a car in it, a manageable thing. A 40-foot container is only about $1,000, $1,200 more than a 20-foot container because many of the costs are fixed. So many times people insist a 20 is enough. We get the 20 there. They're starting to load. It pretty quickly becomes apparent that there's no way. And now, you know, we can do it, but now we've got now we've got a half-loaded container. We're trying to go back to a port and get a bigger container, or they're going to ship some stuff separately by consolidator, which, you know, there's just it's just not. We build 3 hours into the price. Most people will look at me with that big wide-eyed look you just gave me and go, there's no way we could load a 40-foot container in 3 hours. If you are ready, if your boxes are packed, if your inventory is made so that what you're doing is checking them off as they go in the container, you're not making your inventory, you're checking them off. If your furniture is wrapped, if what you are doing is loading the container, you could easily do it in 3 hours. We have a truck and a driver sitting there, but they have zero obligation to do anything in regard to your packing. They drive. They're going to put the custom seal on at the end. The only cost you have separate from what we've charged, which we have in writing as a figure you're going to pay, is whatever it costs you to load up your container. So if in fact you've hired somebody, sure, you've got costs there. And I will say that the overwhelming majority of people provide a tip on this end to the guys who unloaded the truck. It's certainly not required. You would probably do it anyway. In most cases, when you had labor, these are guys working for not a lot of money, and so most people throw a little tip their way at this end. But there are no other charges, so there's not going to be, you know, when that trucker comes, you're not going to suddenly be paying somebody else this and that. It's easy that way, and also, again, it just takes the whole mystery out of it. You don't have that whole, well, how much is this, how much is that, you know, am I getting ripped off here, or was I supposed to pay them there, or whatever. So part of, again, our job is just to help simplify it for you. Let me just talk briefly about cars, because that's another thing you'll hear really divergent opinions on, bring a car or not. We, like many people, assumed we'd come here and buy a four-wheel drive. The cars we had in the States we didn't think were terribly appropriate, but in the end we brought my parents' 1995 Ford minivan. You will read people who say, never bring an American car, like as though no one could work on American cars here, as though an American car part didn't exist here. And this is just nonsense. Now, I am not going to tell you you should rush out and buy a Ford or a Chevy or something to bring down here. Okay, not so much. You know, the Nissans and the Toyotas and so on, all things being equal, are going to be a better option for you here. If what you have is a car that serves you well, and if what you have is a car that's going to be reasonable for your life here, then bringing it is a good idea, you know. You already got Toyotas? Cool. We had a Ford minivan. I'm not going to say that's the top of the list of perfect cars for Costa Rica, but my parents owned it. It was paid for. It was old enough that it was not going to have much value if we sold it. So we were going to get a couple $1,000s for it up there, and what? You know, we were going to have to buy something here. So what we did is we brought it, and we've been here 3 years, and it has served us fine. Now we go through brakes a lot because we live in the mountains and we ride the brakes all the time, and we go through motor mounts surprisingly fast because we're just shaking the crap out of the car all the time. But it's done us fine. It costs us less than $3,000 to nationalize, pay all the duty on and everything, and 3 years later we're still driving it. So there's kind of a balance there, you know. In a perfect world, you would bring down a nice, appropriately sized four-wheel drive Toyota or Nissan or something, and you put it in your container. It costs you not so much to ship. We handle all of the processing, the duty, everything involved with nationalizing the car here. And there is more than just duty. You hear people talk a lot about the percentages of duty, and that's really only one piece of it. So there are a lot of costs. I can tell you, if you ended up wanting to come and you want to ship a car, you can give me all the details, and you won't give me enough the first time because no one believes me when I say all the details, and I'll write you back and tell you what I need, and I can actually tell you how much it'll cost to nationalize that car. Very broadly speaking, it's almost twice what the car is worth. I mean, meaning that much again. So if you have a car, very broadly speaking, that's worth 10 grand in the States, it will cost you about that much by the time all is said and done here. The duty, the marchamo, the Retevi inspections, our fee. You know, hey, you can save a little money if you want to do it yourself, but I mean, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. And I will tell you right now, and George actually touched on this, the people who tell you not to ship your car typically shipped their car by themselves. And they went through a process that can only be described as hellish to try and get it nationalized. You know, it's just not, I wouldn't do it, you know. And so someone who does that is pretty understandably going to say, don't bring your car. Cars here are often, and I'm going to add a little caveat at the end to that, but I'm going to give you some big broad stroke generalities. They're junk, literally. They were bought as insurance totals in the States. They were put 4, even as many as 6 into a 40-foot container. You do the math and figure out how scrunchy that means they have to be. You know, an average car is 15 to 17 feet long, 40-foot container. Do a little arithmetic. They're brought in here. Bodywork here is cheap. Shiny paint job costs very little here. And mechanical work's cheap. We own a car that was totaled. My husband once fell asleep at the wheel, drove off the road, very narrowly defied death by driving right in between 2 great big trees and dropped, you know, 15 feet to the railroad bed below. He loved that car and was absolutely determined that the insurance total was just nonsense. The car could be fixed. So we bought it back from the insurance company and we fixed it. The car was never, ever the same because, you know, the insurance company totals it kind of for a reason in some cases. There's stuff that just doesn't ever really get right again. That's the majority of cars that are sold at the used car dealers. That's what they bring in. If you're going to buy a brand new car, it's not a bad thing to do here. You got dealer warranties and all that. You have to be aware you are in fact not getting the same car in most cases as you would get in the States, even if it's called the same thing. They don't have to meet U.S. crash standards. If a car was bought here new, so it's a decent car, let's say, a little off, but decent, but now it's been driven around for 5 or 6 years in Costa Rica, now you've just had the crap beat out of it on the roads here. Good cars can be had. There are some services who will help you find good cars. I don't want to make it sound like it can't be done, but it's not your path of least resistance. I am going to tell you that in many cases. If you already own a car that's good, or if you can buy a car that's appropriate and put it in your container, it's a good way to do it because you know what you're getting.